Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Now this is the very first video of the Web Development Bootcamp. I know a lot of us have been hyped about it since a very long time. So the wait is finally over, and in this video we are going to start by learning Linux. At this point of time, if let's say you're using Windows and you don't have Linux, right, then what I'd suggest is that first get Linux and then watch this video, or watch this entire Linux Masterclass. Only then watch it, because I mean eventually you'll learn Linux in this video, but the practice depends on you, right? So it would create a lot of gap in the middle, and then when you get Linux, when you try to practice, you'll forget a lot of things, right? So it comes with practice. So I'd suggest that you can go that through that route. Or if let's say you're someone who thinks that you're fine using Windows or something like that, then I mean, it's my advice, it's my opinion that you should get Linux, because Linux is what makes you a programmer in the first place, right? And it opens up a lot of opportunities for you, especially if you are pursuing to be a DevOps engineer, and even for web dev, it comes in handy in a lot of places. And you know especially when you're talking about things like containerization and using Docker or Kubernetes and things like that. So setting up that entire infrastructure of your application, or getting used to you know what the DevOps guys are doing, it's going to come in handy there. And if you're someone who is using WSL, then again I'd recommend that you get Linux instead of using WSL, because some things do not work in WSL, and it has a lot of disadvantages compared to Linux. And if you're using a virtual machine, then I think it's fine. I mean, as long as you're able to practice what you're doing, I guess it's going to be fine. At the end of this video, I'm also going to talk about what are we going to do next, like what is coming in this bootcamp later on. So do make sure to stay tuned for that. And without any further ado, let's get started. Now, before we get started about learning Linux, like what Linux is and how shell works and things like that, let's just try to understand what happens first when you start your computer. So I'll quickly share my screen. Alright, so let's say that you start your computer. Right. Now, once you start your computer, what is the first thing according to you that happens? What is the first thing that happens when you start your computer? Just think about it for a little bit. Pause this video and think about it. So when you start your computer, the first thing that happens is that it executes the softwares that are there in the BIOS, right? So it executes the softwares that are there in the BIOS, right? And what is this BIOS? The BIOS is basically a basic input output system, right? So the first thing that happens is that it executes the softwares that are there in BIOS, and BIOS is basically a basic input output system. It is also referred as a firmware, right? And this firmware that is there, it comes by default in a computer, stored in a small chip that is there in the motherboard, right? So there's a small chip in the motherboard, and that small chip is an is a ROM, right? That small chip is a ROM, the read only memory. You cannot write to it, you can only read from it. There's a small chip in the motherboard that is a ROM. And this firmware, this BIOS is there in that ROM. And when you start your computer, the first thing that happens is that it executes the softwares in the BIOS. And generally the job of this is to check if the system is working correctly or not. So what the first thing that it will do is it will check if the memory is loaded fine or not, right? And it will check if the RAM is there or not. It will check if the what devices are connected to the system, or what drives are there, what hard disk is connected, and things like that. It would also check if the keyboard is connected or not, etc, etc, right? So it will do a lot of these checks, the checks to see if the system is ready to launch the operating system or not. And once it feels that it's good to go, it can now start executing the operating system, start the operating system. The second thing that it does is to you know load the bootloader. And this might not be the case all the time, right? It depends on cases to cases, but in most of the scenarios out there, it would load the bootloader, and this bootloader is what is responsible to initialize the operating system, right? So it loads the bootloader, and this bootloader then starts the entire operating system, right? And different operating systems might have different bootloaders that comes with them. But yeah, I mean, bootloader is a part of an operating system, and it is responsible for starting up the operating system, right? And that's what happens when you start a computer. That's how the operating system turns up, right? We often, there are fast boots and things like that nowadays. Like, it starts up, the entire system starts up in 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds, things like that. So I mean, this is the process that happens when you start a computer, and that's how the operating system loads up. And now let's also understand what is an operating system, right? So what is an OS according to you? Again, try to pause this video and try to think about it, try to answer it. What is an operating system? An operating system is just a software to manage and operate a computing device, right? Now, this computing device could be anything. It could be a mobile phone, it could be a tablet, it could be a laptop, it could be a desktop, it could be an ATM machine. There are so many computing devices out there, right? So the job of an operating system is simple. It is just a simple software that is responsible for managing and operating a computing device, right? Now, for any software to be considered as an operating system, it needs a few things that it needs to do, right? And I'll quickly list down the things that it needs, any software needs to become considered as an operating system. The very first thing that it will need is a kernel, and we'll talk about kernels in a lot more detail later on in this video, as well as in another video as well, where I'm going to talk about the Linux internals that is going to be a part of the Linux Masterclass, so don't worry about it. So the first thing that it needs is a kernel. The second thing that it needs is a file system. So it needs a file system. And the third thing that it needs, like any software to be considered an operating system needs, is that it needs some sort of some sort of a user interface, right? So I'll just write it down. So it needs a so the third thing that it needs is an user interface. It could be CLI, right, the command line interface, or it could be GUI, right, the graphical user interface that is there. And the fourth thing that it needs is that it should be able to take your commands or your instructions, and it should be able to manipulate the data in the memory based on that, right? So should be able to manipulate data based on commands, right? So these are the generally the four things that any software needs to be considered as an operating system. And we're going to discuss about kernels in details later on. And we understand what user interface is, the CLI based or the GUI based user interface. It's self-explanatory that it should be able to manipulate data based on some commands. But what is a file system? right? So file system is basically a method, or you could say a data structure, right, that the operating system uses to store and retrieve data in the memory. Okay, so pretty straightforward stuff. File system is basically a method, or you could say a data structure that the file system uses to store and retrieve data, right? Because I mean, whenever we, try to navigate to a file or maybe open a file based on a, path that we give or things like that, then it generally opens up that file, right? We can do whatever we want with whatever file we want to access, and our computers are so fast nowadays that whatever file we want to, it doesn't takes a lot of time to find what file we are looking for in the entire memory that is there. It could be hard disk, it could be ssd, whatever it is, but nowadays it doesn't takes a lot of time, right? And the reason behind that is that the memories, the rams are pretty advanced these days, and this file system also has been upgrading over the time. It has been like becoming faster and faster, more optimized and things like that. So it is like a data structure that it uses to retrieve and store data in the memory. We are going to discuss about file systems as well, not in this video but later on when we are going to talk about Linux and kernels. So we are going to deep dive into file systems as well, what file systems are, and how it basically works behind the scenes in an operating system. But this is majorly what any software would need to be even considered as an operating system in the first place, right? Now let's talk a little bit about kernel as well. So what is a kernel? So kernel is basically the core of any operating system, and it generally has complete control over everything in the system, right? It can control the memory, it can control the CPU time of any software that is there, and it basically facilitates the interaction between a software with the hardware, right? So that is what it is responsible for, and because of that, I mean, it has complete control over the system. And again, don't worry about it, we are going to study about kernels in a lot more detail, and even about bootloaders as well, what how bootloaders work and what do they do next, how do they initialize an operating system, things like that. We're going to learn about all of that in the Linux internals video, which is going to be later on in this Linux Masterclass. So stay tuned for that. And now, I mean, when we talk about operating system, what are the major operating systems that are out there? The famous ones, right? So the first operating system that is pretty famous is the Microsoft Windows, right? The second one that is pretty famous is Mac OS by Apple for Macintosh devices, and the third that we know is the Linux, right? Something which is like used by majority of the developers and software engineers out there. So these are the three major operating systems that are out there. You may ask, why use Linux and why not go with Windows instead? Why so many developers talk about using Linux or even Mac OS but not Windows? So the first thing like to clear here is that Mac OS and Linux, they are like pretty similar. Why? Because they both are Unix based. However, Windows on the other hand, it is Unix based. It has some components that are Unix based, but majorly it has been derived from other operating systems, right? It uses a lot of things that are coming from other operating systems. So that's why, I mean, developers usually prefer using either Mac OS or Linux, right? And let's try to understand why you should you know go with Linux instead of Windows per se. So why? use Linux, right? So the first thing that is there is that Linux is open source, right? And developers love to go through the code that is out there. Just imagine that the entire operating system's code is in front of you, and if let's say you're facing some difficulties, you can just go through that code and see why you're facing that difficulty and how it is programmed internally and things like that. Just see how how much a software engineer would enjoy that sort of a thing. Also, I mean, it opens up a scope for a lot of updates that are coming up, and a lot of new versions that are coming up. One of the major reasons for that is that whenever a developer spots any issues that are there in an operating system, in a Linux based operating system that is open source, whenever a developer spots any issues, they just quickly uh, write a solution to it, maybe raise a PR, and if it gets merged, it gets rolled out in the next release, right? And due to that process, since so many developers around the world are contributing to it, then updates keep coming up on a regular basis, and it's generally it's not like just because it's open source it's not stable, right? On the other hand, if let's say bugs keep coming up in Windows, since it is a commercial product, what happens is that though these developers they wait for a certain amount of time. They might wait to collect a list of bugs that are out there, and then solve them in one go, and then come up with an update, right? So the bugs tend to exist for a longer period of time when they appear in Windows as compared to Linux, right? So being open source is like one advantage that is there. And secondly, I mean, you can also say that you know it is perfect for programmers. One of the reasons is that you know it supports almost all programming languages, right? So that is also there, and also it offers vast range of applications or tools that are development friendly, right? They come very handy when you are developing any software or things like that. So it also comes with a lot of such tools that are there. And we also know that terminal Linux terminal is sort of superior to command line, right? And you know also, I mean, a lot of libraries or tools, command line tools that get developed, they get developed natively for Linux, right? So it has better support. So terminal is superior to CMD, right? That is there. And also, it's kind of easier to get things done in Linux. One of the main reasons for that it is that it opens scope for bash scripting. And if you, let's say, have any prior development experience, that you may know what I'm talking about, because bash scripting is used in a lot of things. It would be used if you're using Docker for containerization, things like that. It can be used in it is heavily used in DevOps and things like that. It is also used a lot in scripting and having maybe some cron jobs or things like that. So there are a lot of things that happen with that. And it also gives you ability to SSH into any server that you might have hosted remotely. And don't worry, I mean, don't worry about the technical jargon that I'm talking about here, bash scripting, SSH, and things like that. We are going to cover all of this in a lot more detail later on in this course. But for now, just for the sake of listing down some advantages of using Linux, you can refer to these advantages. And these advantages are not all advantages that are out there. There are a lot more advantages to it, but you get an idea, right? You get an idea about what I'm talking about here, so I don't have to elaborate that anymore. And now let's talk about a little bit about the history of Linux. Where did it come from, right? So in 1969, there were two developers. One was Ken Thompson and the other one was Dennis Ritchie, right? And these two developers were working for Bell Laboratories, and while working there, these two guys came up with the first Unix operating system. Now later on, after some time, they rewrote that entire operating system in C language, and it was majorly to make that operating system more portable, and soon after it became a widely used operating system around the world. Right, so this is how the first Unix operating system came into picture. And a decade later from then, a guy named Richard Stallman started working on the GNU project. And during that time, a lot of other operating systems were also created, like BSD and Minix, etc. They were all Unix-like, but one main thing that was lacking in all of these operating systems was that they didn't have a common kernel that is there. And kernel is what we talked about earlier on in this video. There was no unified kernel for all these different versions of operating systems. They were all Unix based. This BSD, Minix, they were all Unix based, but they didn't have a unified kernel, right? So then in 1991, right, a guy named Linus Torvald, right, in 1991, a guy named Linus Torvalds started working on something which we now know as the Linux kernel, right? So this guy is the father of Linux, in a sense. Right. So that's how Linux came into picture. This all started in 1969, and in 1991, Linus Torvalds was the person who started working on what we now know as the Linux kernel. And this Linux kernel is like the unified Linux kernel that is there for all the distributions of Linux that are out there in today's time. All the Linux distributions that are there, they all use the Linux kernel that Linus Torvalds developed in 1991. And there are so many distributions out there. I mean, there's Debian, there's Ubuntu. Ubuntu is the one that I am using right now, right? And then there's CentOS, and you know there's Fedora, and there's Arch Linux and things like that. So the reason why I am using Ubuntu right now is that in my opinion, it's the right blend between a GUI as well as a CLI. Because if, let's say, you are a lifelong Windows user up until now, or maybe if you're working on Mac, then that's not an issue. But if, let's say, you're a lifelong Windows user, then it could be pretty tricky to just suddenly make a switch to command line interface, right? So you still need a little bit of GUI, right? And Linux is all about keyboard, right? I mean, the software engineers, the professional software engineers and good developers that are out there, most of the times they don't even need to use their mouse, right? It's all about keyboard, like getting things done just with the keyboard, right? And you would notice that in a lot of good software developers that are out there, they completely rely on keyboard, even to switch tabs and things like that. They just use keyboard for each and everything that is out there, right? So it could be quite tricky to be completely based on a CLI based operating system, and I feel that Ubuntu is kind of in the middle ground, where it offers you the functionality of CLI but has a decent GUI to it, right? And maybe after working on Ubuntu for some time, getting comfortable with command line, you can choose to focus on Arch Linux later on. But initially, I wouldn't recommend that you go directly with Arch Linux, because it's like one of the most trickiest operating systems I've ever worked with, honestly. It's not like I'm afraid of CLI or anything. I quite enjoy working on CLI, but it could be just too much, right? Sometimes. So choose wisely. There are a lot of distributions, as I mentioned, Debian, Ubuntu, and Linux Mint, Fedora. Arch Linux, things like that. Choose wisely, whatever you want to go with. It completely depends. It's not like one distribution would be better than other. There would be, some differences out there. It might be that one operating system is better than the other in some aspects, right? One distribution is better than the other in some aspects, but overall, since they all, deep down follow the same kernel, the Linux kernel, I feel that more or less they all, you know work on along the similar lines, and they all give, decent performance. So at the end of the day, it just comes down to preference, right? So if you prefer to work on Fedora, no one is stopping you, right? I personally, started working with Ubuntu in my initial days, so that's why, you know I whenever I want to get back to Linux, I just, you know try to get back to Ubuntu because that's my definition of Linux, or sometimes Arch Linux as well. I find it kind of challenging, but it's a good challenge. So these are my two preferred, and I kind of also like a little bit of Fedora is a good operating system if you want to go with that, but it's just preference, right? So no one is going to stop you if you want to choose any other, distribution that I've not mentioned in this video. There are a lot of distributions, right? So yeah, with that being said, now let's jump into the main content of this video, which is learning the command line, right? Learning the basic commands of Linux. Okay, now for this, let's start with the basics and with the beginning, right? Let me close this thing. And now what you see in front of you is Ubuntu 22, which is the latest version, the jellyfish version. Um so far haven't had any problems with this. So but people still say that it's buggy. So you could go with 20.2 LTS instead of 22.2, and this is what you see when you start your computer with Ubuntu. Might be different for different distribution, and the first thing that we want to do is we want to start the terminal. So there are two ways to do that. First is that I can do control plus alt plus T, which is going to start a new terminal for me, right? And the second thing that you can do is you can press the Windows button, and after pressing the Windows button you can type terminal, and then you can open your terminal, right? So to increase the size, I just did control plus shift plus plus, right? So I pressed control, along with it I pressed shift, and then I pressed the equal to sign, because shift and equal to gives me plus, so it's control plus, right? And that's how I increase the size of my terminal. And this is a regular terminal that is there. And this terminal is basically a text, input and output environment, right? It is a text input and output environment. It is, also referred to as console in some of the cases. And its job is to just, launch the shell that is there. With this, you might be wondering, now what is a shell, right? So a shell is basically like a command line interpreter, right? So a shell is a command line interpreter, and why it's an interpreter? Because it executes each and every command line by line, right? So just like how Python works per se, that you write the entire code and it goes about it executing line by line. Even terminal, you write a command and it just executes it and then asks for another command. That's how it works. So shell is like a command line interpreter. It just executes each and every command that you give to it at a time, and it figures out every time how to execute a command. It doesn't wait for the next set of command. It just executes what you have entered first and then asks for the second command. You could also say that it's like a program, that takes your command from the keyboard and then, you know sends them to the operating system to perform. Right, so it takes your command, you type something from your keyboard, it takes your command and then gives it to the operating system or the kernel, you could say, to execute it. And also, most of the shells by default use bash as their programming language, right? So whatever we type in this terminal is bash scripting or bash programming, or all the other aliases that it might have. It's nothing different. It's nothing super advanced or things like that. Shell by default uses bash language, right? Bash programming language. And whatever commands we type in this terminal, uh, indirectly we are writing bash programming, right? We are writing bash commands. So that is there. And most of the shells that are out there, they have this following format that you're seeing in front of the screen, right? So there's this first Apoorv Goyal, which is here, and this Apoorv Goyal is nothing but the username of my device, right? And it is followed by an at the rate, and after the at the rate I have my Twitter handle, Apoorv tweets, right? And this is my host name, you could say. And then it is followed by a colon, right? And after the colon it has this this symbol. I don't know what this symbol is called, but this symbol represents the home directory. And it this symbol is generally the directory in which you are in. And then it is followed by a dollar sign, which means that after this you can start typing. So since shell uses bash programming and bash programming language, and most of the tutorials for any programming language start with a simple hello world, let's print hello world into the console, right? So to print anything into the console, there's a simple command known as echo, and whatever you type after echo gets printed into the console, right? So if I simply type hello world right here, after an echo command, then what you see in front of your screen is that hello world has been printed into the console. It is displaying hello world. It has executed that command, and I can type whatever I want to. Like after this, I can say hi, I am Apoorv. Try to avoid this single quotes and double quotes, because this has different meaning in terminal. But I can write it like this, right? And if I press enter, it is going to give me whatever text I have after echo, right? So this is a simple like hello world program, which you could say echo hello world, and it simply prints echo. It simply echoes hello world. You could so say that echo is the command here and hello world is the argument of that command, like what do you want to echo, right? So it echoes hello world, and that was like our first program in shell, in bash programming language. So kudos to you for that if you practiced it with me. And moving forward, let's start exploring some other commands as well. So there is a command known as pwd, which is print working directory, or present working directory also. Some people call it present, some people call it print. But what this pwd does is that it simply tells you where you are in your computer, right? Because you know whenever let me show you with an example. So let's say if I'm currently opened this up, it says that I'm in my home, right? And I can simply go to the desktop, and it says that from home I am in desktop, right? So there is a path to whatever folder or whatever file we try to open in a computer, right? There's a path for that, right? And in Linux, or in any operating system per se, everything is a file, right? Each and everything that is there is a file. And you'll start understanding it later on in this course, but for now just know that everything in Linux or in any operating system is just a simple file. And you know all of these files have a path, and they are organized in a hierarchical order, right? So it could be and by hierarchical order I mean that you can see in my screen that desktop here is inside the home, right? And even home is inside something else, right? Inside what exactly is something that we are not able to access from here, since this is a newly installed operating system in my device. I'll have to configure what I want to have here. But from home I know I can go to a lot of things. I can go to pem files if I want to, if I can go to downloads, and I can go to documents, I can go to whatever folder I want to, right? And each and every folder might have some files in it. And if like, just to give you an example, if you, let's say, I go to my downloads folder and I go to blog images, then I can see that it has a lot of files inside of it, right? So each and every folder, there's an hierarchy to each and every file that is there. In the current scenario, we could see that inside the home folder there was a downloads folder, inside the downloads folder there was a blog images folder, and then inside the blog images folder there was a lot of files, right? So there's a hierarchy to these files. And again, I've mentioned already that all the things in Linux are just files, or in any operating system everything is a file in a sense. So that is there. And the first directory where it all starts from, since this is all in a hierarchy, like there are folders inside of folders and files inside of folders and things like that. It's like a tree hierarchy, right? A tree structure that is there. And again, I mean, I should open OneNote, I guess, just to make sure I am explaining it better. uh, okay, taking time to load, I see. But let's worry not. And this is Linux commands basics, right? So let's say that there's this one folder, right, there's this one directory, right? If you're a Linux user, then start calling them directories instead of folders. So there's this one directory. Inside of this directory there are going to be a lot of directories, right? This is going to be D1, this is going to be D2, this is going to be D, or better yet, I could just simply write inside this, right? This is D1, this is D2, this is D3, right? And they might have certain files inside of it, right? So this is like a tree structure, right? This is more like a tree hierarchy in front of me, right? And the first directory that is there, from where it all starts, is known as the root directory, right? So it is known as the root directory. And so all of these are directories here, right? Starting from the root directory, everything is a directory. And let's say that this is again a folder which is d1, right? Like directory 1 inside directory 1, right? And let's say this is another one, and this is d1, d2, right? And so on and so forth, right? So let's say this is the structure. Now what is the path that this directory is going to have? Starting from here, and this is the root directory. Root directory is always denoted from a slash, right? It is a forward slash, right? So starting from a forward slash, and we are talking about the path here, right? So the path for this is going to be forward slash d1, and again a forward slash, which means inside of it, it is going to be d1, d1, right? This is going to have a path of d1. Starting from the root directory here, it is going to have d1 and then d1, d2, right? This is going to be the path, right? So these are basically the paths that are there for all these directories. And when in terminal, let's say we talk about pwd, which is the present working directory or the print working directory command, it gives us the path of the directory in which we are in, right? So it's starting from the root directory, which is the forward slash, and then it says that inside the root directory there's a directory called home, right? Inside of which there is again a directory called Apoorv Goyal, and you are currently inside this directory, right? So this is what it means. Like, this is the path of where I am currently in my entire system, and this path can be retrieved from a command known as pwd, present working directory, right? So that is there, and it's sort of helpful to know, where you are and where you want to go. Because if you, let's say, don't know where you are currently in the system, then how would you know where you want to go, right? So yeah, I mean, it shows you the path where you are from the root directory. And again, I mean, now, up until now, since I talked about it's helpful to know where you are and where you want to go, through the pwd command, it's easier for you to know where you currently are. But how would you know from here where do I want to go? Right. So for that, there is another command known as ls. Right. Ls is simply like to list the directories that are there in the current directory that you are in. Right. So if I, let's say, press enter on this ls command, I can see, all the, folders that are there here, right? And again, I mean, just to show you again, in this, I can see that I have about how many, I have about 12 directories here in my home currently, and terminal always open from home, right? This symbol denotes home, right? So terminal always opens up from home, and I can see that inside my home I have about 12 directories, and the same amount of directories are also listed here. It starts with code, and then community, desktop, documents, so on and so forth, right? So I can see that whatever I am having in front of me in the GUI side of the, of my operating system, I can also see it through CLI as well, right? Through ls command, I can see what folders are there or what directories are there in my, home directory, right? So through ls command, I can quickly see, all the options that I have wherever I want to navigate, right? Or if I quickly want to check what are the contents of a folder or things like that, it's helpful there. And from here, I mean, now I know where I am. I know what options I have in front of me, but how do I go to another directory, right? So that remains another question. For that, we have another command which is called cd, which is change directory, right? So cd command is simply, you type the cd command, and after the cd command, you just type whichever folder you want to, or whichever directory you want to go in. For example, I want to go in the community directory, right? So I can I first I saw where I am currently. I am inside the Apoorv Goyal directory, inside the home directory, and then I checked what options I have in front of me, and then I choose to, change my directory and go to the community directory that I have in front of me, right? So I press enter, and I can see that now, earlier it was just this symbol, but now it's this entire thing. Right. So as I mentioned earlier, this thing tells you where you are currently in your system. So what it is now telling me is that I am uh, inside the community directory, which is inside the home directory, and this directory, like this symbol, denotes the home directory, right? So it's telling me that I am inside this directory now, right? And which means that cd command was successful. I changed my directory, right? So that is how it works. And these are the simple commands, the pwd, ls, and cd, which can you know help you navigate from one place to another. But there's a simple question, right? Now again, let me switch back to GUI. Let's say I am here currently, and I go to the community directory. I see that there's a folder called Virtual Tech School, which is the name of my community. But how do I go back from here? When we look at the GUI version of it, we see there's a simple back button here. If I click on it, I come back, right? But from here, from the command line, how do I go back? For that, what you can do is you can simply do cd and then hyphen, right? So this hyphen, what this dash or this hyphen means is that I want to go back to the previous directory that I was in, right? So it will take you to the previous directory, and it will also tell you where you have landed after this command. And now I can see that I am again back to the home directory that I was there in. Right. So this is how it works. And these commands that are there, they generally have some flags as well. And what flags are is that let's say I want to check the ls, or let's say I go back to the community directory, right? I go back to the community directory, and what I now want to do is I want to check what are the contents of this directory. So I do an ls and I see that there's just one folder known as virtual tech school, right? But sometimes in Linux what happens is that there are some files or some folders that are hidden, that are not visible in the GUI. So how do I access that? Right, I can simply do ls and then hyphen a, right? And hyphen a is a flag, right? It is a flag that can be used with the ls command. And what it does, it tells the ls command to show me all the options that are there. Doesn't matter if it's hidden or not, I want to see all the options that are there. Hyphen a stands for all, right? If I press enter this time, I can see that apart from virtual tech school directory, I can also see two other directories here, right? One is dot dot and one is just dot, right? So what does this dot and dot dot means, right? So let's come back here and let's just try to understand what this is, right? So first off, if let's say we have a simple dot, right? So what this dot means is that it is your current directory, right? To show you an example, I can do here like cd and then dot, right? If I press enter, nothing happens. I'm again in the same directory. I was earlier in the community directory, and now too I'm in the community directory, right? So nothing happens. If I, let's say, now talk about the dot dot, right? It means previous, it means parent directory, right? So parent directory, what it means is that let's say I am currently in this directory, then it will take me to its parent directory, which is this directory, right? Now if I, let's say, talk about uh, this symbol, right? The symbol that we have been seeing in our terminal, I don't know what this symbol is called, but this symbol is just below the escape key in the key on the keyboard. And it also has backtick, so shift and backtick gives you this symbol, right? Backtick is this, right, just below the escape key, right next to the one key, right? So this is my home directory, right? And now comes the hyphen that I just showed you. This is the previous directory. Now you may argue that this and this, they both are same, right? This takes me to the previous directory, this also sort of takes me to the previous directory, but that's not the case, right? Let me show you an example. So if, let's say, I go to the root directory, right? And root directory, as I mentioned, is denoted by a forward slash, right? So this is, I'm currently in the root directory. What do you think would happen if I do a cd dot dot here? Nothing happens, because there's no directory that is parent to root directory, right? Root directory, as I showed here as well, is the very first directory of the entire hierarchical tree, right? So it can't take me back from here, right? But if, let's say, I want to go to the previous directory, which was this, the community directory, right? Will this command cd and then hyphen take me back to the community directory? If I press enter, currently it doesn't do anything. Can you tell me why? It's simple, because I performed this directory like this command, the cd and dot dot. So from this directory I move to this directory, right? So my previous directory in this case becomes this directory only, right? But if let's say I go to this directory, right, I do cd and then community, right? From here, if I do cd and then hyphen, it will take me to the previous directory. And previous directory in this case is which one? Is it the home directory or the root directory? Home directory is this one, and root directory is this one. It will take me to the root directory, right? Because, and imagine it this way, right? From here, let's say that you were in this directory, and from here you directly came to here, right? So now what happens is, or better yet, let me tell you, let me explain it to you this way, better yet. So let's say that from here you directly come here, right? From the root directory you directly come to this position, right? Now from here, the let's say the case one is cd hyphen, right? So this cd hyphen is going to take you to this directory, right? But if let's say in another case you do cd, and then dot dot, right? So in this scenario it is going to take you to this directory. And to show you an example, again, if let's say I go to cd and do that same thing, community, right, and this time I do cd dot dot, it's not going to take me to the root directory this time, it's going to take me to the home directory. If I press enter, I can see that this time I have come into the home directory, not the root directory. So if you directly jump places, if you directly go from one directory to another directory, which are not, let's say, not related to each other per se, and you went there through a, through an absolute path, which we are going to talk about later on. If you jump from one directory to another, then it might make a difference. Then that dot dot notation and the hyphen notation might give you different results. So in this case, if I'm going from root directory to community directory, if I'm using a hyphen, I'm getting back to the root directory. But if I'm going from root directory to community directory and using a dot dot notation instead, then I'm going to the home directory, right? So that is what is happening. So this was all about uh, this thing. And we already talked about flags, right? Flags are basically you know most probably all the commands that are there, they have these things called flags. And you can call them as arguments as well, you can call them as options as well, or you can call them whatever you want to call it. But they kind of add more functionality to what you're doing. So a normal ls command gives me this, but if I, let's say, do ls and hyphen a, then it also gives me all the other things that are there. And you can see that earlier it was giving me just these few things here in the home directory, but right now I can see a lot of things. I can see this dot and dot dot folders that are there. I can see this dot bash rc, which is something I don't know, right? I mean, you don't know at this point of time. This is something known as .config and .genome and .mozilla. So whatever starts with a dot in Linux is hidden by default, right? It doesn't shows up when you, let's say, try to access that same thing from GUI, right? So that is there. And again, I mean, there are a lot of files. .python history, I'm not sure what this is, and .cache and .pki, .ssh, .profile, .npm, .less, hst, .bash history, .bash logout, so many things, right? So there are a lot of things that happens behind the scenes. And if I, let's say, do ls and then hyphen l, it gives me a detailed impression on all the folders that I have, so it tells me some things about its permissions, and it tells me some things about what user it is from. It tells me the size of it, maybe it tells me the date of last modification and the time and things like that. So it tells me a lot of things, right? And I can see a lot more details that I otherwise might not see in an ls. And again, I can combine two flags as well. I can do ls hyphen la, right? So what this la would do is it is going to give me a long, a long description of all the things that I have, but it will give me description of all the things that are there, even the ones that are hidden. So hyphen la is giving me things about the hidden files as well. It is giving me information about the hidden files as well. It is giving me the regular information as well, but it's also giving me information in long format for the hidden files as well. So these are called as flags, the general flags. And that is there. And again, if you feel that your terminal is very populated and you want to clear it out, then you can just simply type clear, press enter, and it all gets erased out. Doesn't exactly gets erased out, I can access it again. But uh, we'll talk about it, how you can access it again. So this is how it is. And yeah, now since we talked about that shell or terminal by default uses bash programming language, then we know that a lot of programming languages have the ability to add comments, right? So just similar to, again, I can again just use hashtag and type this is a comment. And this just becomes like a comment, right? Because as I told you earlier, shell is like an interpreter for the bash programming language that we are writing in it, right? Whatever we are writing in it is the bash programming language. And since bash is a programming language, it gives us option to add comments as well. And if I add a comment, it doesn't do anything. It just tries to execute it. It says that it's a comment. It says that it needs to, the interpreter or the shell says that it needs to ignore it, and it can just simply ignore it. I can add as many comments as you want. This is the ls command, right? I do an ls, and then I can do, this is a pwd command, and I can do pwd. I can just keep documenting my journey through comments, right? So yeah, that is there. Now there's one more command that is called as the mkdir command, right? The mkdir. What this does is, as the name is self-explanatory, it simply says make directory, right? So you can create a new directory. And currently, as you can see, I am in my home folder. I can simply create a new directory known as Linux Masterclass, right? And I press enter. I now do ls, and I can see that there's a new directory created which was not there earlier, known as the Linux Masterclass, right? So let's go to the Linux Masterclass, right? And now there's another command that is known as the touch command, right? So what this touch command does, it simply just creates a file. If I, let's say, do touch and then a.txt, and currently in the Linux masterclass that I just created, I can see through the ls command, then there's nothing in this folder. But now if I do a touch a.txt here, press enter, and I do ls, I can see that there's a new file created which is known at a.txt, right? And there's another way to create this as well. I could have been in the home directory. I could have done a touch and then Linux masterclass, and then with a slash I could have done b.txt. I press enter, and I then checks what is there in the Linux masterclass. As you can see, what I'm doing here is that I'm just using some relative paths, right? Instead of being inside the directory, I'm doing certain stuff from a different directory. I can simply check ls of the root directory, that what all is there in the root directory, right? So there are a lot of things that can be done through this, right? It's not like you have to be in the directory to perform some things. You can do anything from anywhere that you want to. That's the beauty of Linux, right? And as I can see, I now have two files. So what that touch command did was it created a new file for me. And I can also write the file command, right? There's a file command. If I do file a.txt, press enter, it says that a.txt is empty right now, right? It says that a.txt is empty right now. So to overcome this, there's an editor in you know uh, in Ubuntu that comes by default, which is known as gedit. I can do a.gedit and then a.txt. If I press enter, then it opens up that file in a new folder. I can type whatever I want to. I can type that hi, I am Apoorv, right? Please subscribe to this channel. Hope you enjoy the bootcamp. Right, I type whatever I want to, I save it by a simple control S, I close the file, right, and then I again check the file. It says that this a.txt is an ASCII text file, right? So the file command simply tells you like what the file is, what the content of the file might be, and things like that. Gives you some details about the file, right? And that is the file command. And there's another command that is known as cat, right, or it is also short for concatenate, right? And what this cat command does is that it just kind of displays the file's contents, right? And it can also combine multiple files contents and show the output to you in the console, right? So that's what this cat command does. And it's not a great idea to use this command for large files, but you can do it for smaller files. So like just how I created this a.txt, which is a small file, if I simply do a cat and then a.txt, press enter, it will tell me like what were the contents of that file, which is I am Apoorv, please subscribe to this channel. Not promoting myself here, but and hope you enjoy the bootcamp, things like that. And again, if I try to do the same thing on b.txt, which since I created but did not enter anything in it, it's empty, it doesn't gives me any output, right? So that's the cat command that is there. And moving forward, we have an history command. We have a command known as history. So up until now we have typed a lot of commands, right? I mean, we have been like we went through the pwd command and ls command and this command, that command, right? So how to know like in which order we have been executing commands, right? Or what commands have we executed so far? So if let's say that you cleared out your terminal accidentally, right, and you want to know what commands you executed in the past, there is a command known as history. If I press enter, I can see that I executed all these commands in the past. Like, don't worry about all these ssh and all these commands, that was way before this bootcamp. But yeah, I mean, I think for today, I mean, we have this graph. Yeah, I think, yeah, so it just gives you like an entire picture of all the commands that you have executed in the past. And I think it is giving me the entire thing, like since the beginning of this computer. I like the first command I executed on this computer was gparted, since I was trying to dual boot this system. And this we'll cover those commands later on uh, in the Linux internals video, so don't worry about that. But yeah, it gives me a complete picture of all the commands that we have used. And there's also another way to access previous commands, which is by using the up arrow key. So if I simply press up arrow key, it shows me that the last command I used was clear. Before that I used history. Before that I used clear. Before that I used cat b.txt, cat a.txt, so on and so forth, right? I can go as you know like early in time as I want to go. If I keep pressing the up key, I can see that the first command that I executed, the very first command that I executed was gparted, right? So and again through down arrow key, you can just navigate from up arrow key and down arrow key, things like that, right? Not a big deal. But yeah, you can, it comes in very handy, because I mean, just imagine that some command that you executed, maybe you did some typo, maybe instead of ls I did la. And it again, ls and la are similar because la also says list all, and ls is list directories or things like that. But if I let's say do lm and press enter, it says lm command not found. But what I intended to do was I intended to press ls, right? So I can just press up arrow key, I can just do a backspace, I can press an s, and I can press enter, right? And it just works. And currently it might not be looking as a big thing because the commands are small, but later on, even if you took a look at the history that I was like showing you, if let's say that I made a typing error in a command, that is like this, right? If I let's say made a typing error here with so many numbers and things like that, would it be feasible for me to type it again? I can just simply press the up arrow key and make the changes and move forward with my life, right? So that is the thing. You can, if let's say I move too far above in the video and now I don't want to go back just to empty it or press backspace, I can simply do control C and it opens a new line for me, right? So control C is also something that comes in handy, pretty handy. And you there's also one more way to search any command that you might have executed, which is control plus r. Control plus r is reverse search, which searches whatever commands you have typed. So if let's say I typed some ssh command or something and I want to check what that command was, so I can simply type ssh and I can see all the ssh commands that I executed and commands near that. So before SSH I did some chmod and things like that. Don't worry about these commands again, I mean we will be covering them later on. But yeah, I mean control R, again I can do control R, I can see that I used a mkd. I just type a simple mk D and it tells me, or just with a simple M, it's telling me that I executed a command mkdir and then Linux Masterclass to create a folder called Linux Masterclass, right? So that's something that you can do. Again, to exit it, you can simply type control C. Control C mostly works in exiting all the things that are there in Linux. Some of the things might not work, for them you can try control Z, control Z, right? But control C is going to work in most of the cases. So that is there. Clear, I mean we have already covered. Then there's one thing known as autocomplete. So if let's say I go back and now I want to do cd and then Linux Masterclass, so does it make sense for me to type the entire Linux Masterclass? It takes so much time, right, just to type it. So what I can instead do is I can just do cd l and then tab. When I press a tab, right, it just autofills it for me, because L from like starting from L, there's just one folder in the entire home directory, right? So but on the other hand, if let's say I do cd and then C, right, so there are multiple folders that start with C. If I now press tab, nothing happens. But if I press tab two times, right, if I press tab two times, just give me 1 minute. Oh sorry, I'm not in the home directory, got me wondering. Right, so if let's say now I press tab two times, right, it's just going to show me the options that what do you want, right? It again, just notice that after pressing cd and C, it autofilled the O for me, because C O is like common, but after that it cannot decide which folder I want to go in, right? So if I again keep pressing tab, it's just going to keep showing me that these are the two options that you have, and tell me where you want to go. If let's say I press M and then tab, it is going to autofill that for me. If let's say from this I press D and then tab, it is going to autofill that for me, right? So again, this tab is very handy to autocomplete things in your terminal. And again, there's a command known as cp, right, moving forward. So in this folder, as we know that I have two files, a.txt and b.txt, right? Now let's say that I go back to my home directory and I create a new file here, test.txt, right? If I ls now, I can see that test.txt is coming up here. And again, if you may notice, all the folders that are there are coming in dark blue color, but all the files that are there in coming in white color, right? So that also is a good representation of the terminal to tell you which one is a file and which one is a folder. I could have just created a file known as uh, I could have just created a file known as test without an extension. Again, if I would have done that, then test and test.txt, both of them come in white, right? So it's not uh, extension dependent per se, right? And yeah, if let's say now I created, let me just remove that test, and rm is the command to remove. We are going to emphasize more on the rm command later on, but rm is the command to remove a file. And if let's say now I want to copy this test.txt and paste it in the Linux masterclass, right? So what I can simply do is I can simply type cp and then test.txt, which is the file that I want to transfer, and then the path in which I want to transfer it to. So I'm saying that from here I want to transfer it into the Linux masterclass folder. I press enter. I check here. I have the test.txt here, but if I let's say go to Linux masterclass and do an ls, I can see that the test.txt exists here as well, right? On the other hand, if let's say I remove this test.txt again with the rm command, we are going to cover that in a lot more detail. But if I let's say wanted to have this file removed from here and moved into the other folder, then what I would have done is I would have used the mv command, right? So mv is the move command, like I want to move this file from this location to another location. Again, the same concept, I write the name of the file that I want to move, and I you know uh, write where I want to move it, right? So I can see that it does not exist here anymore, but if I go to Linux Masterclass and do an ls, it exists here, right? Now let's say I have this file here, and let's say that now what I'm doing is I'm going to my desktop, which doesn't have anything. So from here, if let's say I want to move something, can I do it from the desktop folder? Do I need to be in the folder where that file exists? Just think about it. I don't have to be in that folder, right? What I can do is I can simply do mv, and then I can do from my home directory, I want to go into the Linux masterclass. Again, I press tab because Linux is smart enough to understand that inside the home directory there's just one directory starting from L, right? And I want to move the test.txt in that, and I want to move it into the the home directory, right? I press enter. Again, doesn't happen, nothing happens there. But if I go to the home directory and I press an ls, I can see that the test.txt now exists here, right? And if I go to the Linux masterclass here now, right, and I press enter, it doesn't exist here, right? So it's not like you have to be in the folder from where the file, from where, in which the file is, that you have to move. You don't have to be in that directory. You can do it from anywhere in the computer as long as you know the path, right? So that is there, and that's a very good thing that is there with Linux. And I could have used absolute paths as well. So currently I was using relative paths, but I could have done with uh, absolute paths as well. So and I'll explain the absolute and the relative paths to you just in a bit, but let me just show you an example. So let's say that again I want to move that file, but this time I want to do it from the home directory, right? So I'm from the root directory. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an mv with a forward slash, then I'm going to do home, then I want to do Apoorv Goyal, and then what I want to do is I want to select that file test.txt, and again I'll do the same thing, home Apoorv Goyal, and then Linux Masterclass, and then press enter. Again, I can check from here that if I check my home and then Apoorv Goyal and then the Linux Masterclass, right, and I check the contents of it, I can see that that file exists in the Linux masterclass now. And if I check the contents of the home, I can see that it doesn't exist here anymore. I can remove the file directly from there. From here, from being in desktop, I can remove the file directly. Like from home, I want to go to Linux masterclass and I want to remove the test.txt file, right? So now if I again do this ls command on the master class, I can see that that file doesn't exist anymore, right? So let's go to the home directory, root directory again. Let's do ls, right? I can see from my root directory I have a folder known as home, right? If I, let's say, go to home, it says that I am currently in slash home, right? Like I am in the home directory from the root directory. Now if I, let's say, do ls here, then it says that there's a folder known as Apoorv Goyal. I go into Apoorv Goyal with a cd, right? And I can see that now I am in the home directory. Home directory is represented again through this symbol, right? So that is there, and that is how absolute and relative paths work, right? So in the example that I just showed you, let's say we are talking about the Linux Masterclass folder directory, right? So it has two paths in a sense, right? Or let's say it has two types of path. One is an absolute path and one is a relative path. Let's try to understand them, right? So let's say I'm currently in my desktop folder, right? Now I want to go to the Linux Masterclass folder. There are two ways to do it, right? The first thing is that I can do the absolute path, which is that from the root directory it is in the home directory, then it is in the Apoorv Goyal, it is then in the Linux Masterclass, and here I am in the Linux Masterclass. Or uh, I could have also done it through this, like cd and then home and then Linux directory. In a sense, this is also an absolute path, right? Because home is, it knows where my home is, and then from there I want to go to the Linux Masterclass, right? So that is there. But now let's say I want to go to the Linux Masterclass from the desktop, from its path, right? So what I can do is I can first do a cd dot dot, which means I want to go to the parent directory of the desktop, right? Because here if I do cd hyphen, I'll go to which directory? Would I go to the home directory or would I go to the Linux Masterclass? I'd go to the Linux Masterclass, right? I'll go to the Linux Masterclass because that was my previous directory. That's not my parent directory. That's my previous directory from where I came into the desktop, right? But if I do cd dot dot, it would make me come to the home directory, right? And from home directory, I can go to the Linux Masterclass, right? So this path earlier, right? This path or this path, these were like the absolute paths to for going into the Linux Masterclass, but this is a relative path. And by relative path, what I mean is that I'm trying to find a path from the desktop. From the desktop, I'm first going to its parent directory and then I'm going to the Linux Masterclass, right? But from here, it doesn't matter where I am because it's an absolute path. If let's say I was in some other directory, then also it would have taken me to the Linux Masterclass. If I would have been in, let's say, some, you know, other directory other than desktop, then it would have been taken me to the masterclass. And to show you an example for that, let's say that this is the command that I used, right? I'm using cd dot dot and then Linux Masterclass. I press enter, I come to the Linux Masterclass. But let's say this time I take a different approach. I go from downloads, and from downloads I go to uh, maybe YouTube images folder, right? And from here I press that again, like cd dot dot and then Linux Masterclass. This time it does not works because I am using a relative path here, not an absolute path, and this relative path does not leads me to the Linux Masterclass. So in this scenario, since I am inside of YouTube images, which is inside downloads, which is inside home, I should have done dot dot and then slash and then dot dot and then slash and then Linux Masterclass, like going to the parent directory of the parent directory to the Linux Masterclass. Now if I press enter, I am coming back to the Linux Masterclass, right? So this is all about the paths that you need to know. And again, the cp and the mv commands that we talked about to copy and move files based on absolute path or relative path doesn't matter as long as you get it right, right? And mkdir command we have already discussed, but let's just take a step back, right? Let's say that I remove the a.txt, I remove the b.txt, and I go to back and I do rmdir and Linux Masterclass, right? Rmdir is like to remove directory. So rm was to remove a file, rmdir is to remove directory, right? So let's say now I want to create a folder called Linux Masterclass, and inside of that I want to create another folder called testing, right? So there are two ways to do it. First is that I do mkd, let me clear it first. So the first thing way to do it is I do mkdir, and after mkdir I do Linux Masterclass, right? I cd into Linux Masterclass and I then do mkdir and then testing, right? And I now can see that there's a testing folder inside of Linux Masterclass, right? That's one way of doing it. Right, that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is that I just do mkdir hyphen p, and after that I do slash Linux, not slash. If you use slash here, it is going to refer to the root directory. So either you do current directory slash, or you just do directly Linux Masterclass, right? So I do Linux Masterclass and then I press a tab and do testing. I press enter. This time, right, I can see that I have a folder called Linux Masterclass. I'll go into Linux Masterclass. I can see it already like automatically created a folder for me called testing, right? And now let's just try to do it another way and see what would happen, right? I again remove these folders and I use the same command that I used earlier, right? But this time I remove the hyphen p and I press enter. It says that Linux master class directory does not exist, right? So what that hyphen p does, that p flag, what it does is that it creates directories for you. So if let's say you want to create a directory and inside that you want to create a subdirectory, you can directly give to the path of, like, give it the path of the subdirectory, and if let's say a directory, a parent directory for that does not exist, it will automatically create that for you, right? So that is the hyphen p flag. And since we have been talking a lot about the rm commands, the remove command, so rm is for removing a file, rmdir is to remove a directory, as we have already seen so far. Yeah, now let's say that we have a scenario that I like, again I'm going to create a directory, mkdir Linux Masterclass, right? I create a directory and I go into that directory and I create a file called a.txt. I come back, right? And this time I do an rmdir on Linux Masterclass, right? So now what I notice is that it cannot remove that directory this time because that directory is not empty. It has some contents, right? So to tackle that, what we can do is I can simply do an rm dir, let's say, and I can add an hyphen r, right? And I can then do the Linux Masterclass. I press enter this time. Sorry, it's not rmdir, it's just rm, right? So rmdir does not have that flag, but rm and then hyphen r and then Linux Masterclass. I press enter and this time it works. I do an ls and I see that the Linux Masterclass directory does not exist. So why does this happen this way? It's simple reason: the hyphen r flag that is there, it means recursive, right? So what recursive means is that whatever files that are there inside a folder, delete them recursively and then remove the directory, right? So the hyphen r simply means recursion, and it just removes all the files inside of it recursively, and then, you know, and I could have done it another way. If let's say I again create a file for directory known as Linux Masterclass, and I create two files in it, a.txt and b.txt. I can do it just with a single command. I don't have to type it again and again. But the only problem is I created it in this folder. Let's try that again. Right, I do this, and this time I do rm rv and then Linux Masterclass. So this time, sorry. So this time it also tells me what all it removed, because this V means that I want it to be verbose, right? I want it to tell me what it is removing, right? So it now tells me that it first removed the Linux master class, and inside of it b.txt, it then removed a.txt, and then it removed the directory which was Linux master class, right? So in that's there for the rm command, that is there. Let's do one more thing. Let me create another directory called bootcamp, and inside of that I create another directory called testing, and inside of that I create another directory called testing2, right? And now I create a file inside that called a.txt, right? So this is what I've done. Now let's say I have this file a.txt and I want to find this file. I want to find where this file is, because I know that there's a file known as a.txt in my system, but I just don't know where it is, right? So I want to find this file. So for that, what I can do is I can do find, and then I can say that I can use the simple find command, and after that I can tell it like where I want to find it. So I know that it's somewhere in my home directory, but where exactly is something that I don't know. And I can tell it that I want to find it in the home directory, and then I'm giving it an argument. The name of that argument is hyphen name, and then I'm telling it that the name is a.txt, right? And I press enter, right? So it tells me that there's a file called a.txt that it has found inside a folder called bootcamp, inside a folder called testing, inside a folder called testing2, right? So it's pretty easy, right? If let's say you want to locate a file that you may otherwise not be able to find, then this is something that you can do, right? If let's say I want to, let's say I just know that the name of the file is a, but I don't know what the extension of that file was, right? So I can just do a dot asterisk. What this asterisk means is that blah blah blah, like whatever it is, right? So it just says that I know the name of the file, it's a, right? But I don't know the extension. So whatever extension you get, I'm fine with it, as long as the name of the file is a, right? If I press enter, it will again give me the same result. I could have done this the other way around. I could have said that I want a file that has a .txt extension, but its name could be anything. I just need all the txt files, right? I press enter, it shows me so many txt files, right? Because I created the website of virtual tech school, so there are a lot of txt files I wasn't aware of. But yeah, so I can locate text files like this, and if let's say I want to find a folder, I'm saying that okay, I want to find a folder this time. Again, I know that it's in somewhere in the home directory, and I am not sure. So this time what I can do is I'll give it a flag known as type, and this the value of this flag is d for directory, right? And then I'm going to give its name, which I'm saying is testing2. I press enter, and it tells me where the testing2 directory exists in my system, in the home directory, right? So this way you can use the find directory as well, right? And now we have been dealing with a lot of flags lately, right? I mean, there's this flag and there's that flag and things like that, but we are not sure. I mean, like we are not able to remember all these flags. So what do we do in that case? So for that, there's a simple command known as man, which is short for manual, right? And it just loads the manual of that command for you, right? So if I let's say do man and then do find, what it's going to do is it's going to show me like the entire, all the things that are there in this find command, right? So it's going to show me this entire documentation of that find command, where I can see, how the names were added and things like that. For example, I was adding name, and I also added a type, right? If I go down a little bit, I can see that there's a type, and then type, inside type, D stands for directory, C stands for character, F stands for regular file, and blah blah blah, right? So there's a lot of documentation that is there, and this documentation would exist for all the, this manual is going to exist for all the commands. Even for ls, if I check, I can see that there are so many flags out there, right? You can go through these documentations, understand the commands better. So that is there. And there's also a command called whatis, right? So what is basically, describes a command, like, in short, and it just tells you in short like what that command is all about. So if, let's say, I do what is ls, so it's like I'm just asking it what is ls, right? Or I can say what is la, right? Nothing appropriate. Right? So it just says that it is not appropriate. If, let's say, a command does not exist, then it just says nothing appropriate. So it's just like asking like what is this command, right? If it, let's say, that command does not exist, it just says that it's nothing appropriate. Otherwise it just tells like what this command does, right? I could do what is find, I can do what is mv, I can do what is cp, I can like ask what is this, right? So that is there, like it's a very basic simple command. So yeah guys, that was pretty much it for this video. There's still a lot of content yet to be covered in the Linux master class itself. We have still not talked about the standard input, output and errors, and we still haven't talked about some file manipulations that are there. We also have to cover things like user management and processes and packages and how it works behind the scenes, Linux internals and things like that. A little bit about permissions as well, and there are some other interesting things like environment variables and stuff that we are going to discuss in the next part. You can expect the next part of this Linux masterclass on Tuesday this week, and this coming Tuesday, which is I think 17th of May. So you can expect the second video on 17th of May. And apart from that, I also wanted to like mention that I'm also going to create a video on Vim editor as well, like how to use Vim editor and the basics of it. It is like very one of the most common editors that comes with the terminal and the Linux, that is used by DevOps engineers in different cloud services and platforms as well, to access different files and make some quick changes and things like that. So that's what we are going to cover, and later on in some time we are also going to look at some of the networking concepts with Linux as well, how subnetting is done and things like that. So do make sure to stay tuned for all the upcoming videos on the Linux Masterclass. And talking about the Web Development Bootcamp, so for the Web Development Bootcamp, the first video is going to be quite special because we are going to start the first video with the HTML for that, and you can expect that video in, I guess, 10-15 days from now. It's still under development, but you can expect that video this month itself. And in the first video we are going to learn HTML, and along with learning HTML, I'm also going to like show you how to build stuff using HTML. So what we are going to build is that we are going to build the static landing page of our community's website, the virtual tech schools website. So that is going to be extremely exciting because the website is going to be up and running, and you will see the result in front of you. But how we achieve that result is something that is going to be the agenda of learning HTML. So in the first video we are going to create the skeleton of the HTML skeleton of that landing page, the entire landing page of our community's website. And in the second video we are going to fill in some colors and add some styling and CSS to it, just to make it more appealing in terms of how it looks. And in the third video we are going to start covering some of Bootstrap and things like that. And we'll just keep taking it forward from there on. So the videos are not just going to be teaching you stuff, but they are also like I'm going to show you hands on how I'm implementing those skills to build something that is already live out there, right? So it is going to be pretty exciting, and as I mentioned, you can expect that HTML video and the starting of the web development bootcamp in 10-15 days from now. Up till then, I mean, I would be posting videos on the Linux Masterclass, and I also mentioned that I would be increasing the frequency of my videos, so you can expect that as well. From now onwards, there's going to be about 2 videos, if not 3, every week. So be prepared for that. And one thing I would like to mention is that I'm going to start a new hashtag on Twitter, which is going to be learning with Apoorv. You can see it on the screen above somewhere here. And just make sure that whatever bootcamp videos you are watching from now onwards, whatever tutorial videos you are watching on my channel, make sure to use that hashtag learning with Apoorv, and make sure to write a tweet about it, tag me in those tweets, learn in public, right? Try to write some blogs about it, try to create some content with what you're learning, because learning and creating goes you know side by side. They are not different things, right? The more you create, the more you learn, right? So create some content around it, create some Twitter threads, create some blogs, write some blogs, use this learning with Apoorv hashtag in those blogs, in that content, tag me in that content, share that content with me, share that content with the in my Discord community. If you haven't joined that already, then do make sure to join that. And just learn in public, because that is going to bring a lot of opportunities for you. So if you are already putting a lot of hard work, if you're putting in that hard work of going through my videos, watching my videos, my 2 or 3 hour long videos, if you are putting in that hard work, then utilize it well, right? Learn in public, and why waste opportunities, right? If learning in public can get you good opportunities, if they add up nicely, your profiles add up nicely in your resume, your work adds up nicely in your resumes and things like that, utilize that, right? If you're watching a 1.5 hour video, 2 hour video, just spend maybe half an hour or 1 hour more on it, just to write a nice blog about it or a good Twitter thread about it, and use that hashtag, right? So that we can spread awareness about this bootcamp, and we can you know uh, get more members in this bootcamp, so that all of us can learn together, right? Just let's start creating opportunities, right? Because the opportunities come to us only when we are open to them, right? So learn in public, be open to opportunities, and good things are going to happen, right? Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this video. I tried to explain everything as per I felt content, but I know I kind of might have stretched a few things more than I should have, but I developed it, this bootcamp keeping the below average students or the average students in mind, because they are more important than the intelligent ones. Intelligent ones can just quickly skip through the content and just get the gist of what I'm trying to tell and things like that. But some learners are slow, right? So be empathetic, because I'm taking my time to teach here, and I'm open to feedback, so feel free to leave your give feedback to me on how you like this tutorial video in the comment section below, and I'll make sure to take some good pointers out of it and implement them in my videos coming in future. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And do make sure to subscribe to the channel if you liked the video, and stay tuned for the bootcamp, because a lot of exciting stuff is coming your way. It is about to come your way. I have a lot of exciting stuff planned for you guys, so be prepared for that. And keep learning, keep hustling, and take care of your health, sleep on time. And if you're watching it late at night, so jao, ठीक है. And till then, I'll see you later in the next video. Bye. Oh.